who I am and sort of what I do. As Ariel noted, I am a Senior Director of Global Consumer Relationships and Engagement, bit of a mouthful, at Kimberly-Clark. I work as part of what we call the Digital Marketing COE, Center of Excellence, really focused on driving digital transformation globally across all of our brands, some of which are shown here. It's a group of only about 25 people or so, so as you can imagine, keeps us all fairly busy. But I've been with Kimberly-Clark for about 2 years. Actually was introduced to Kimberly-Clark through my prior role when I went to the UK to pitch to Kimberly-Clark as an agency lead. I went there to pitch for a first-party data and consumer engagement platform for the Andrex brand. And coming out of that session, learned a lot about Kimberly-Clark's ambition to go after first-party data, and actually had the leadership team reach out to me following that meeting and ask if I'd have interest in coming in-house. And so absolutely jumped at the opportunity to build something from the ground up. Over the last couple decades roughly, I'd worked a number of years in different digital agencies across a number of different verticals: financial services and auto, food and bev, pharma, B2B, tech, retail. But really, from day one in my career, always been really focused on data-driven and consumer-centric marketing. So one of the reasons why I was so excited to really make this move into KC is, because I realized that CPGs historically have really, treated consumers like every time they talk with them, it's the first time they've ever talked with them. It's really unfortunate, and it's sort of this short-term memory, really, that wouldn't work in any other relationship. Yet we subject our consumers to this sort of treatment every single day. And so, it's an amazing opportunity to step in at a time when CPGs are now beginning to build their own first-party, environment, so that they can understand who their consumers are, what they are and aren't buying, and optimize those experiences. Ultimately, we want to enrich our understanding of the consumer so we can drive a better conversation. We want to build a deeper relationship. So we sort of view, first party as just another data source, if you will, right alongside second and third. Zero party data, I roll into first party. It's more of an explicitly designed, use for first party. But we think about the role that each of these sources of data play in allowing us to drive against our business growth objectives. And each of these, data sources have their own unique, pros and cons, where first party might be more accurate, but certainly creates challenges when it comes to how do we store and manage a secure environment, and some of the legislative challenges that come with that. Third party data, right, with the deprecation of third party. I don't think I'm on a call these days where somebody isn't bringing up the impending doom of the deprecation of third party. But even outside of third-party cookie, third-party data more generally can be found to be less accurate, but it certainly gives us the ability to drive that sort of reach and scale that we're after. I think where we're spending a lot more time, even more so just over the last 6-7 months, is more in the second-party data space, viewing that as a great opportunity to replace some of the scale and volume that we're now going to be missing out on in those third-party environments. But ultimately, again, it's about using all of this to enrich that consumer understanding, that consumer profile. So there are, countless number of use cases that demonstrate why first-party data matters. Whether you're talking about lookalike audiences to drive penetration, or driving engagement, ultimately affinity, loyalty, advocacy, upsell and cross-sell opportunities across a portfolio, or even marketing efficiency and effectiveness. I think the challenge becomes for CPG manufacturers today: how do you demonstrate that this first-party data, effort, the ambition behind this matters? And the way that most CPG manufacturers are doing that is by building use cases and then starting to roll those use cases out, because you demonstrate the impact, the effectiveness that this can have in driving business growth. So I'll just give you one quick example of a place that we saw this actually in Germany with our Dry Nights brand, where they had been driving some sampling efforts for roughly 50 weeks And we stepped in and started having conversations about how we could leverage first party to actually build a custom audience through Ad Studio in Facebook. And in just 2 weeks, we actually drove 70% more samples than had been done the prior 50 weeks. So these are the kinds of massive business improvements we're able to drive by leaning into our data, our new data asset, that we're scaling out around the globe. I think CPG as a whole is really starting to move into this journey of owning that consumer relationship. And so I built this story as something just to sort of help demonstrate the journey that we're all on, sort of from some of the basics into sort of where are we going eventually. I think it starts with just defining what are your first party data goals. Once an organization decides that first party data matters, you need to establish like how much first party data should you be going after? What gives you enough confidence or the ability to leverage that to build your lookalikes and scale the way that you want to in non-first party environments. But one of the first things that we need to do as manufacturers is start to get risk and regulatory environment well defined. And obviously in my global role, this becomes incredibly complex as you look at all the different legislation that's hitting in the different regions and how they're building to ensure that we're protecting the consumer and protecting Kimberly-Clark. But then you also have to make sure that you're getting your data store. This is your world of the known. What are you doing to make sure that your data is actionable, that there's a data environment that allows you to do your own mining and modeling? And then you need to get your identity resolution, which becomes your world of the unknown. This is the world that allows you to help manage your understanding of that consumer across all of your, for example, paid media efforts. So this world of the data store, the identity res, it's the world of known and unknown, and you can't get to orchestration unless you have your data house in order as part of your fundamentals to be able to connect those experiences in a meaningful way. Then you step into more of that change management space, which I say is that space where manufacturers start to recognize the fact that consumers don't experience their brand through paid media alone. If you put yourself in a consumer's shoes, when was the last time you experienced one of your favorite brands through a digital banner? And so recognizing the fact that our consumers are more than just a paid ad that drives them into a retailer to buy, and recognizing that there are moments that we can provide real value becomes incredibly important for us. But when you start to recognize that and start to build plans that deliver on those business growth objectives in an omnichannel or multi-channel way, you also then need to make sure that your brand marketers around the globe are trained in how to execute all of those channels in a most effective way, which requires a significant level of change management. Then you get into connecting what I call mythical silos. Your call center is over here, your sales is over here, your marketing's here. That requires also a significant amount of just understanding the fact that we're all talking to the same consumer, just in perhaps very different and disconnected ways. How do we ensure as manufacturers that we're building that single view of the consumer so that we're not creating a more fragmented experience? Then you step into what I say is the run phase, the realization phase, which is where we see manufacturers moving beyond sort of their brand-centric or product-centric lens and starting to think about, how would I and how should we be operating through the lens of consumer centricity across our entire portfolio? When brands start to toe into this consumer-centric space, organizations start to toe into that, you see them move beyond just the low bar that the risk and regulatory compliance might play from a privacy perspective, and they move more into the space of privacy by design, which means that they're putting emphasis on true trust building and transparency initiatives to make sure that consumers not only can see what's being collected and how, but how is that data being utilized, and give consumers true control over that experience so that they can opt in, out, or down communications. They can choose channel preferences. And so you see a lot of manufacturers starting to move into that space as they move into this phase of consumer centricity. That also opens up, obviously, the opportunity to move beyond the lens of a single siloed brand, but think about the role that every one of your brands might play in any given moment with the consumer, and making sure that you're making the most of every moment you have. And then absolutely thinking about transactional understanding. If you can see what consumers are and aren't buying, what can you do to ensure that you're maximizing that basket opportunity? And ultimately, moving into the orchestration phase, if you're able to recognize those signals and activate off of them and win in those moments, we should be automating those. So every time those signals hit, we have that ongoing stream of comms to drive that business result. So ultimately, when somebody asks me today, why first party data matters, why are we spending the time that we are going after this ambition? This is not just KC, this is all, we're doing this because it gives us an opportunity to optimize that one-to-one LTV. That is why first party matters to us. So naturally, as you might imagine, as we toe more and more into this space of truly trying to own the consumer relationship, it introduces some interesting points of tension, specifically in terms of how we manage our relationships with our retail partners, our customers, we call them. And so there are three in particular that I'm going to spend the rest of my my time here sort of sharing. The first is this idea that relationships matter, but they matter to manufacturers too, CPG manufacturers as well. Lifetime value, it's about the portfolio. It's not just a siloed brand view. And walled gardens and clean rooms are great, but they also can get really messy when you have so many of them. And so the first one here about relationships mattering, CPGs are beginning to recognize the value of relationships beyond just the next transaction. I think historically, in large part because of mixed models and multi-touch attribution, it's very easy for us to look at paid media doing its job in terms of grabbing consumer attention, pushing them through the funnel, pushing them into retail to close the loop. And you have sort of this self-fulfilling, this model that tells you that just keep putting more money into that paid media effort and you're going to keep driving that next transaction at retail. The challenge is when we don't have any line of sight into that transaction, we lose out on understanding more about our consumers, not just about like the basket opportunities, but also, we miss out on understanding things that can help inform our own innovation. When manufacturers have that visibility, have that line of sight, it gives them the ability to help manage the category overall, even in our relationships with customers. So this is, in large part, as I was noting, it's a result of the fact that we've been overly dependent on paid media to the point that everyone really owns this direct relationship with our consumers today, except for us. So we know consumers are researching and they're making decisions, well before that first moment of truth. That first moment of truth may exist in physical retail. The zero moment of truth is sort of where we lean in. Like, we need to make sure that we're owning a lot more of that conversation in that zero moment before it moves to a first moment, whether it's a digital or a physical shelf. So the way that manufacturers are starting to respond to this real point of tension is by beginning to invest in more orchestrated experiences beyond paid media. We call them PESO plans, paid earned shared owned plans. We realize we do need to make the most of every moment, and we recognize the fact that our investment can impact paid, owned, and earned. Our investment, if we're doing paid, owned, and earned well, it'll drive shared. I like to joke, if I knew it was going to make something shared or viral, anybody who knew that would live on their own private island somewhere by now, because we were all sort of after sort of what makes something go viral. But our focus is on really defining the right investment mix of paid, owned, and earned to sort of drive that sharing as an outcome. Our brands today are starting to really ask some of the tough questions, about things like, how much should we be investing in paid search versus how much should we be investing in non-working content for our website? To boost our organic search, and what's the right balance between paid search and organic search, because we know it's proven that there's a multiplier effect when you manage these channels in an orchestrated way. And so I think, and to take that even one step further, we've actually gone on and built an entire approach to value exchange. And I think we see this happening in the market, where you're trying to determine if we're going to ask consumers to provide a level of information to us, we have to ensure that there's mutual value. We have to ensure that we're showing them how we're going to actually benefit them in a more meaningful way as we go forward. So with that sort of a peso focus, manufacturers now can start to extend that conversation into their, into their investments and look at sufficiency in a completely different light. If you know that to drive 1 million consumer actions, these real engagements, not just impressions, it might cost you $6.5 million using traditional click-through rates to get 1 million clicks on an OLA, but it only costs $1,850 to drive 1 million email clicks using traditional click-through rates or open rates on email. So this is not to say we should be moving all of our paid investment over to email, not at all. This is to say that there's absolutely some level of waste in the system that if we were better able to connect the entire peso experience, we could leverage some of the money spent on OLA to existing consumers that we already have a relationship with, use email in that case instead, and then use that funding to broaden our reach, extend our reach in smarter ways. So we've done some of this work. This is something from a few years ago, just as an example to help land this a little bit, where we sort of view the role of each of our channels and how they play in a journey to move a consumer from Huggies into pull-ups. Where, just as a quick example, we don't want to give them a discount first day to get into pull-ups. We want to start the education process early on through our own relationship and then seed that and complement that with some of our paid media efforts, eventually driving them into purchase at the right point in that journey. The second point of tension that I wanted to share is this one about lifetime value being about the full portfolio, not a single brand silo. And again, when you don't have that view into the total purchase basket, we're really not able to effectively optimize the way that we could. Ultimately, if a consumer walks into retail, a lot of it's out of our hands in terms of whether they buy our brand or buy a competitor's brand. But if we actually knew more about that consumer and could manage that transaction a different way, we might, for example, see that a consumer was buying allergy medications on a receipt and know, well, it's really important for us to make sure we get a Kleenex message in front of that consumer in that potential moment. And so again, not having that line of sight into the transaction creates some lack of basket optimization opportunities for most manufacturers. What's interesting, I think here is that the pandemic in 2020 really started to, push even our retail partners when it comes to how are they managing last mile delivery. And so I'm sure everybody's seen the rise of Instacart even more so over the last year. There's some interesting tension that's occurring there right now, where a lot of our retail partners who, we don't get to understand our consumer transactional data from, they're now in that exact same boat where Instacart is now the owner of the upstream data flows with consumers, and they know what consumers are buying, what they're buying, and from whom. And so it starts to create some tension now between retailers and Instacart when it comes to that last mile delivery. So it's clearly a space everybody's trying to figure out. So how are manufacturers responding to this? I'll tell you two ways. First, it's through receipt scan partnerships. We have a great partnership with Fetch Rewards. Through that partnership, we get full receipt scan data. We understand at the one-to-one level, everything that's in the basket, who they're buying from. Gives us the ability to start to understand individual share of requirement, start to make moves in and out of Fetch, frankly, because we have a first-party implicit opt-in from these consumers. So it allows us to manage a relationship with an individual, either inside of Fetch or outside, to drive against the growth objectives we have. This has proven so successful for us in the US that we've even migrated our own rewards program to be integrated, Huggies Rewards, to be fully integrated into Fetch. It's an amazing partnership that we realize provides incremental value for our consumers by giving our consumers more ability to redeem for rewards beyond just our products, but being able to leverage the entire suite of partners that Fetch already works with. The other space that manufacturers are starting to respond to here is by building their own D2Cs. And this can get really controversial. And there is a lot of discussion about sort of the upside opportunity here. The reality is last year, I don't think I could go to more than 2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe, without seeing another CPG manufacturer standing up a new D2C. And so the focus that most of us have right now is on, first of all, just identifying the commercial opportunity, defining our value prop, and what is our right to win in that space. making sure that we're managing channel conflict and ensuring that the learnings that we get can be a win-win. It gives us an incremental value opportunity, but also allows us to build a story that we can bring back to some of our retail partners who we depend on in a lot of cases to drive the scale that we're after. So the third point of attention that I'll call out is walled gardens and clean rooms. You know, these are super appealing, very much needed. It gives us the reach, gives us with the clean rooms the ability to understand the effectiveness of what we're doing within those walls. The challenge is it's not just the Facebooks and Googles today, but a lot of our retail partners are essentially operating as their own walled gardens as well. So while there's so much opportunity for us to be able to optimize within those environments, the unfortunate reality is that these gardens are now essentially the new data silo. There's a total lack of ability for us to actually pull anything out at the one-to-one level. We can get audience reads again through the clean rooms. But when we need to stand up these clean rooms inside every single garden to understand our efforts, we just end up with a very fractured view, a fragmented view of the consumer that makes it really hard as a manufacturer to be able to effectively manage frequency, for example. So the way manufacturers are starting to respond to this is by, bringing their own identity solutions in-house and starting to think through how do they strategically deploy audiences in the most effective way. And so a quick example here might be if I have my known world and my unknown world identified, as I showed you in that earlier map, I can choose to deploy a communication through an OLA. I can bring a consumer in, onboard them, push out an audience, and ensure that a consumer gets an impression day 1. Day 5, I can then choose that exact same consumer to receive an email. And then based on what they click in that email, I can then choose how to deploy that individual as an audience on day 7 through Facebook. So truly starting to build a business logic layer, a business rules layer that lives above the known and unknown environments, gives us the ability to then manage optimal paths, digital paths to purchase, gives us the ability to really truly migrate consumers along a journey that results in the right outcome. So I'll just close by saying I believe the best news is that we're seeing data, technology, and creative come together in a way like never before to truly enable a new consumer experience, and a consumer experience that really does start to create a win-win opportunity for both the manufacturers and our retail partners. The key here is that we build transparency and trust in our partnerships, and I think we're starting to see a lot of that just by the nature of the fact that these clean rooms are being stood up, because there is a desire to make sure that we're leveraging these platforms to drive the most meaningful outcome, not just for us, but for the manufacturer as well. And so I think what I would leave everybody with is that there is a world, and we're seeing this through different technology partnerships as well. There's a world where everyone can win, as long as we continue to remain focused on collaborating to build richer consumer experiences, realizing the consumer at the end of the day is truly in control. So I will stop my sharing there. And I believe Meggie was going to come on.
Hey, Josh.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, thanks.
Hey, I wanted to say great job. That was a fantastic presentation. There's so many awesome insights and nuggets in there. And I know we've got about 15 minutes to chat, and there was way too much to dive into. So you and I will definitely have to regroup, but thank you for that thoughtful presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So for the greater audience, I am Meggie Giancola. I am head of CPG and NCH strategy here at Valassis. And for those of you that might be joining us a little late, just to reintroduce the fantastic Josh Blacksmith, Senior Director of Global Consumer Relationships and Engagement at Kimberly-Clark, who just took us through a fantastic presentation of the world that's evolving around us and how that impacts the way we think about consumer engagement and the entire journey to purchase. So thanks again, Josh, for that. So Josh, right out of the gate, one of the things that stuck out to me right from the very beginning is your point around a core principle being data-driven, consumer-centric marketing. And it's music to my ears, because that is 100% what we are focused on at Valassis as well. everything, as you and I have spoken about, everything that we do here at Valassis is rooted in our consumer graph. And our number one most important tentacle of our business model is to understand who consumers are, because as you and I have spoken about, that understanding enables us to have the most thoughtful path to purchase and truly engage in the right ways. And what's so interesting as we think about CRM and first party, that's been around for a while. And to your point, as you shared, it's an evolving strategy, but a core principle behind truly understanding this motivation to buy. There has been a ton that has changed in the last year and a half for us personally and professionally. Disconnectivity due to the growth of e-commerce. We think about the shift in consumer behavior, resurgence of the mailbox with people being home. There's a multitude of trends. I'm just so curious to know from your perspective, when you think about specifically the last year and the trends that have taken place, how has that put renewed sense of energy behind first, second, third, zero party data, and how you're thinking about using that to shift consumer behavior?
Yeah, I think I'd say it accelerated our ambition. I think that the vision was there, but I think the urgency behind being able to have a channel to be able to deploy. I think everybody was witness to the panic buying that happened in our categories, in our toilet tissue categories last year, and I think it started to demonstrate the importance of ensuring that you have the ability to not only manage that fulfillment mechanism through your own channel, but through your retail partner channels as well. So I would say that the place that we've probably, I would say, leaned in a little bit differently over the last year has been to sort of lean even more so into our brand purpose. To think a little bit more about how do we ensure that our brands can stand for something more than just our functional product attributes, and ensuring that we're leaning into that purpose in a way that starts to unlock conversations that we can have with our consumers in a way that's different. If you think about who really wants to have like a relationship with a toilet paper brand, when you think about like your purpose, and sort of where we push with that brand around care down there, and the idea of caring, extending that purpose into an engagement, a relationship that can take it to a different level, has been everything for us. And I think that we still have, areas of opportunity to continue to push and grow in that space. But I've seen that grow in a significant way and become sort of a focal point for us over the last year, just given all of the different things that we're hitting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I love that care down there example, because it touches on, I have so much fascination with consumer psychology, particularly looking at the last year and what's shown up. And a key piece is this whole concept of empowerment, right? Particularly in light of so many of these social and injustice issues that we've been faced with, namely in the last year. I have a story. People have found their voice, and they have found different ways to action that voice. And that has put a heightened sense around the whole concept of value, right? And in the CPG world, in our world, value has oftentimes meant sense off, promotions, and things of that nature. But it's changing the game and how we think about the term value. And you touched on this in your presentation. Consumers care about what brands stand for. They're open to buying differently through different motivation. And it's just really interesting to think about how you're actioning that with the Care Down There campaign. And I'm curious, kind of building on this concept of heightened sense of around value, what else are you thinking about in that vein? And how are you thinking about pivoting and iterating?
Yeah, so we've built a value exchange framework that we use, and it's really meant to help ensure that as we're going to be building consumer-facing experiences, that we're creating something that will actually drive the appropriate level of engagement. And so we built this through the lens of 4 real pillars. One is around utility, which can be very broad in terms of its interpretation, but that's intended to be that way. Community, exclusivity, and economic incentives. And so those are sort of our 4 pillars. That is, we're putting anything into the market, particularly in the sort of one-to-one space. We're wanting to make sure that we're finding ways to deliver on that. And so we, I would say that it's very easy for any CPG manufacturer, for any brand, frankly, to throw an incentive into market and to drive a short-term result. And so we're very quick to acknowledge the fact that while that might be the right sort of acquisition mechanic to bring a new consumer into a brand, we very quickly want to move that consumer into some of our other value levers so that they find ways to engage in a deeper way with us. So how quickly can we move beyond the incentives and move into unlocking utility or finding ways to connect a consumer into a broader community that is experiencing some of the same things they are, whether it's the mom community or whatever. And then moving consumers into this belief or feeling of the fact that we value them, and so we're creating exclusive experiences for them in some way. So that's been really, I would say, really important for us as we've thought about like even moving beyond some of the things that we've been doing from a brand purpose perspective.
That's interesting. It's so interesting to think about that journey as you lay that out, right? And you're almost suggesting what could have been a tried and true historical promotion or incentive in the CPG world, thinking about it less as a commodity, the way maybe historically it has been, take coupons, for example, and more about a change agent. And how does it become a carrot or an enabler to capture data? How does it become an opportunity to then engage them differently? Does that look like a higher value coupon as you start to see these trends that could, in theory, change some tried and true tactics CPGs have relied on for many years when you just look at them through a little bit of a different lens in light of some of these broader goals? It's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that.
And I think we're also in the space of sort of owning the consumer relationship. We're starting to get, we want to become more sophisticated, right? And thinking about when we're deploying those incentives. I don't think that it's in anyone's best interest. It's definitely not in the manufacturer's best interest to just sort of blanket a market
Right.
with an offer. And so having that rich understanding of which offer might be right for a consumer based on their, price sensitivity and consumption modeling that we might do. And understanding if it should be $1 off of 4 packs or $1 off of 1 pack to drive that desired outcome. But those are the kinds of spaces as you get into this transactional space and you really start to understand, it gives you the ability to sort of manage with a lot more, meaning and to drive the best result. So,
yeah. So in that vein of thought, going all the way to the end of the funnel, is it safe to say that KPIs could also change as we think about, I'm hearing you talk and I'm thinking, well, could it become more about owned brand site traffic? Right? When you're trying to create and curate that connectivity, does that become more important? Obviously, conversion is always going to be important. It's a key metric, but does it start to change the way that you as the manufacturer view that funnel and what truly are the right KPIs?
Yeah, it's interesting because I sometimes will say that I don't know that the funnel exists anymore. I know that's everybody has been saying that for years, but when I say that, what I specifically mean is that I find times where you're going to drive awareness of your product in a category, consideration, purchase, advocacy. You're going to drive the full funnel in a matter of a minute and a half. If you have the right experience in market and you happen to be introducing your product in a moment of need, right? And so it's not to say that the funnel is dead. It's meant to say that it's definitely accelerated. Because there's so much information at every consumer's fingertips today. You can go from not even having any idea that there's a solution that might meet your need to buying it and saying it's the best thing ever in a minute and a half,
Right.
Yeah, so I would say that we're definitely looking at sort of how do we measure success. To your point, it has to be delivering on our business growth. But ultimately, we are looking for indicators that demonstrate that demonstrate that this is something that's driving that ultimate outcome, that conversion event. And so we have to take steps beyond, like I was saying, our mixed models and MTAs. We have to look at things like a CX score, and how do we actually make a CX score, not just another NPS, but something that's more meaningful, that actually incorporates different levers that we can adjust up or down based on what we're trying to achieve. And so we're having real conversations about the role of that sort of view right alongside an ROI as some of our top, some of our top metrics that we evaluate.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because when you start to think about all of these shifts and changes, it does impact the entire process and the entire funnel. So I appreciate that insight. Yeah. I do want to make sure I leave a few questions for the audience. I feel like I could talk to you all day though about this topic. So thank you for the continued insight and dialogue. Yeah. From the audience, so what innovations and technologies are you utilizing to execute your strategies, and how has that changed again in the last year?
Yeah. We, in the last year, I would say, I'll go back just a little further. In the last 2 years that I've been with KC, I've seen us move from a data environment that had a 7-day lag on data refresh for our own consumers into a data environment that we just launched earlier this year, where it's near real time, at least daily refreshes, has its own environment to enable modeling, data mining. I've also seen us in the last year make a commitment to an identity resolution provider. We, as an organization, KC, we've made an investment in an enterprise tool that gives us the ability to connect a lot of our sort of outbound marketing, traditional silos. And so some of that, by bringing the technology together, starts to immediately help us when it comes to connecting our call center, for example, into our marketing cloud. For the first time, if we've got a consumer who is complaining, we have an easier ability to now suppress that consumer from receiving any marketing communications for a couple of weeks. So one of the one technology I think I'll call out, other than the couple that I already called out, like Fetch and some of the work we're doing with them, we've started to work with a company called Shoppable, which has been interesting for us because it totally lives in that win-win space between us and retail. It's in the D2C sort of space. It gives us the ability to actually understand what purchases are actually happening because we manage the transaction on our own .coms. And we can collect first-party data in that experience. It operates by having real-time APIs from most of the major retailers. Amazon's not in there, but the other retailers have real-time APIs for product and pricing. And so consumers can literally go into this unit in our owned experiences now and shop for the products they want and understand the price across the different retailers and choose to buy what they want and transact completely in our environment. We win because we know the conversion event happened. Retailer wins because ultimately they still get all the transaction detail and fulfill. And so this is like the world of the win-win, and where I think technology is going to continue to push and take us to continue to create this environment where everybody wins. So
I love that. Yeah. That's interesting. Hi, Ariel. I'm assuming you're here because we're out of time.
Yes. Is there any closing thoughts you'd like to impart onto our audience?
I do have one last question, Josh. As you think of the now and you think of the future, whether that's 6 months or 6 years from now, when you think of the now and wanting to own this consumer and all the levers and insights you have about them today, and you think about the future, what would be the one thing, data set, a lens of the consumer, a technology, the one thing that you would hope to have in your arsenal as you think about the future that you don't have today?
Yeah, I love that. I wish there were a silver bullet for orchestration. I think I'd be shocked if this wasn't a common theme. I think it's very easy in theory to establish business rules and manage a relationship at the one-to-one level. And think about that example that I gave, sort of the theoretical example. It gets very challenging when it comes to sort of the cost implications of standing that environment up and then supporting the creative to sort of deliver that experience, understanding if it wins by paying for the right measurement methodology behind it. So ultimately, we're sort of after that orchestration and having conversations with some different providers in the space to make sure that we're enabling our day-to-day brand managers to be more hands-on keyboard, able to sort of build these true journeys, end-to-end journeys across known and unknown environments in a way that puts power into their hands in a way that they don't have to wait a week and pay a bunch of money to sort of have to sort of drive that sort of outcome, but rather can more actively sort of drive that. So that's the thing we're after, and yeah, hopefully we find something close.
I hope for that too. It's an excellent way to kind of close this out, to think about where we need to focus as we move into the future. And thank you again for such an awesome presentation and a wonderful conversation. It was a true pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the time.
Echoing Meggie's thoughts here, such a pleasure to have you both, and I cannot wait to see you both back on the stage soon. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
With that, I will bring on our next speaker. Get ready for a true treat. We have Adam Hattie, who's the Vice President of Marketing at Current, moderated by Eric DeHaan, the CEO at Open Influence. So Adam Hattie is an incredible influencer marketer. So